Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so today we're plunging into a story that has really whispered through generations. It's a legend that's haunted imaginations across centuries and cultures. La Llorona, the Weeping Woman.
Hmm.
We've gathered, well, a pretty fascinating collection of sources, folklore accounts, historical documents, even some scientific analyses and cultural interpretations to, really explore her story.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to go beyond just the spooky tale and understand the profound cultural, psychological, and historical layers of this, well, enduring phantom.
And it's really remarkable, isn't it, how a single sorrowful cry can become such a powerful, um, universal symbol.
Right.
This deep dive will truly show you how adaptable a story can be. It
Mm.
resonates through so many different contexts.
Yeah.
From cautionary tales whispered to children all the way to symbols of resistance against injustice. You'll really see the power of a legend in motion.
So, at her heart, La Llorona is the anguished spirit of a mother who, well, in most versions, lost or drowned her children. Her defining trait. It's that eternal mournful wail, isn't it? Ay, mis hijos. Oh, my children.
Exactly.
A cry always heard near water, often under the cloak of night.
The water element is key.
And our sources consistently portray her as a harbinger of misfortune or even death for those unfortunate enough to hear her cry. But it's important to understand she exists purely in the realm of folklore, right? There's no physical evidence.
None whatsoever. Purely folkloric.
Culturally, she's primarily used, especially around Dia de los Muertos, to caution children, and I suppose in a broader sense, to honor the dead.
And putting this into a broader context, her name itself, La Llorona, which, is Spanish for the weeping woman, immediately highlights that defining characteristic. The verb llorar means to cry or weep.
Right.
And Llorona can even colloquially mean crybaby, or maybe in an older sense, a professional mourner. But here, it's just her chilling title. What I find truly striking, though, are the variations in her name, which really underscore how adaptable this legend is. Like sometimes she's sort of conflated with La Malinche.
Oh, Cortez's interpreter. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. But then, in this really practical, concrete example, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, she was completely repurposed and renamed the Ditch Witch.
The Ditch Witch. Seriously.
Yeah. It was part of this public safety campaign specifically designed to warn kids about dangerous irrigation ditches, those acequias, especially during flash floods.
Wow. So folklore as a PSA.
It's an incredible example of folklore being used as a practical tool for public awareness. And then, some more violent tellings. You might even hear her called Bloody Mary or Crybaby.
That's fascinating, turning a ghost story into a public safety announcement. But what really struck me in the sources was how far back La Llorona's story actually goes. I mean, she's not just some modern spooky tale.
Not at all. Deep roots.
Her roots run deep into Mexican history, dating back to at least the colonial era. The earliest written mentions, according to our research, can be traced to 16th century Mexico City.
Wow, 16th century.
And then she resurfaces in 19th century literature, like Manuel Carpio's 1849 poem. And get this, it identifies her as Rosalia, a wife murdered by her husband. What's notable here is that this version completely omits the infanticide.
Interesting.
It shows just how fluid and dynamic the narrative was, even back then.
Which naturally makes you wonder, okay, what influenced her creation in the first place? Folklorists often link her to indigenous myths, particularly the Aztec earth goddess, Xuacotl.
Swakopul.
Yeah, who was said to weep for her slain children as an omen before the Spanish conquest.
Okay.
Parallels are also drawn with Cotlicu, another powerful Aztec goddess. And as you mentioned, even La Malinche herself gets intertwined with Rudolfo Anaya's 1984 novel, actually reimagining La Llorona as a Malinche.
Right, the connection keeps coming up.
And by the early 20th century, her presence was, well, ubiquitous across Mexico. Folklorist Thomas Janvier noted it in 1906, describing her as a truly potent figure in Mexico City lore.
So she was everywhere by then.
Pretty much. And from there, the legend spread geographically into Mexican and Chicano culture, especially becoming a really significant part of Dia de Muertos traditions. Parents in the southwest U.S., well, famously still use her as a disciplinary tool. They warn disobedient kids, si no te portas bien, te va a agarrar la llorona.
If you don't behave, La Llorona will get you.
Classic, exactly. And the narratives also evolved quite a bit regarding, why the tragedy happened. Common explanations now include rage over infidelity, or maybe the children being illegitimate, or even just simple negligence.
So the reasons change over time.
They do. It's really intriguing how the oral tradition keeps her a living piece of folklore, constantly reinterpreted and adapted to local fears and contemporary social concerns. Our sources even point out this modern tendency to sometimes omit the male character who caused her initial tragedy.
Really? Why is that?
Well, it's prompting scholarly inquiry into changing societal perspectives on gender roles and familial responsibility.
It's a fascinating shift.
So given all those layers of history and meaning, how does she actually appear? How does she behave when she's encountered in these tales? Because the accounts vary wildly, right? But there are some recurring features.
That's a great question because, yeah, while her motivations shift, her presence is often described in very specific, chilling ways.
Right, she's typically described as a tall, thin spirit, sometimes eerie beauty, sometimes just terrifying, wearing a long flowing gown, usually white, though sometimes black,
White gown is common.
with long dark hair and often a veil or rebozo, that traditional shawl covering her head. But don't let that initial image fool you.
No, definitely not.
Her face might suddenly twist into a skull, or her whole form could become skeletal. And there's one particularly gruesome folkloric detail. It claims the bones of her drowned children are sometimes embedded in her spine.
Ugh, yeah, that one's chilling. Her most distinctive power, of course, is that high, piercing wail of, "I miss you hoes." Hearing that cry is almost always seen as ominous, marking people for misfortune or even death.
The signature sound.
Exactly. And other supernatural traits include sudden appearances and disappearances, like she just vanishes if you try to approach her, and this terrifying ability to
It's
shapeshift.
shape-shifting. Into what?
Well, she's been seen as mist, a pale reflection in water, sometimes a floating furry ball, even a shiny jug full of coins, or an owl.
Wow, okay. Very varied.
Folklore also gives her great strength, enough to drag victims into the water, and she can apparently walk on water or move incorporeally through solid objects.
So classic ghost abilities, too.
And here's a really intriguing sensory detail from Guatemala. If her wails sound distant, she's actually very near, and if they sound near, she's far away.
Oh, that's creepy. Disorienting.
Right. And she's often heard between midnight and 3 a.m., reportedly attracted to the scent of unbaptized or crying children, sometimes leaving bloodstains on rocks where she weeps.
Zooming out a bit, LLorona's behaviors are largely, well, predatory and vengeful, though it's complex. She's primarily a nocturnal haunter, always searching for her children by the water.
Right, the search is constant.
Her common behavioral patterns often include child abduction or drowning. Maybe she mistakes other children for her own, or sometimes she actively kidnaps and drowns disobedient kids as a kind of punishment.
A dark twist on discipline.
Infinitely. There's also the fatal siren motif. She lures lonely men, only to betray them, kill them, or drive them mad, often in revenge for her own perceived betrayal.
So dangerous to men, too.
Very much so. The sources make it clear that a direct encounter is almost universally bad news. Victims often feel paralyzed or just go insane.
Yikes.
What's truly intriguing here, though, is that despite all these terrifying accounts, LLorona, as a phantom, she operates outside any biological needs or social life. Her whole purpose is purely mourning and vengeance. No eating, no sleeping, just that.
So with all these incredibly vivid descriptions and chilling tales, it really begs the question, what about actual proof?
Ah, yes. The evidence.
Well, you might not be surprised to hear that there's basically no empirical evidence LLorona exists outside of folklore.
Shocker.
Totally. All sightings are anecdotal or fictional. Any journalistic or online proof, blurry videos, weird recordings, they've been consistently debunked as hoaxes or just misidentified natural sounds.
Yeah, like owls or wind.
Exactly. No footprints, no DNA, no credible photos have ever surfaced. Nothing solid.
So why does the belief persist then, even without any scientific backing? I mean, from a purely scientific standpoint, LLorona is entirely mythical. She completely defies biological classification.
Right. Walking on water, bones in the spine. Not very biological.
Not at all. Those belong firmly in the supernatural realm. Skeptics often suggest sightings are just misidentifications. Owls, frogs, maybe wind patterns creating eerie sounds. That phenomenon, pareidolia, where our brain sees patterns in randomness.
Makes sense. But there's more to it than just misidentification, surely.
Oh, absolutely. What's truly fascinating is the profound psychological and sociological depth behind the legend. Psychologically, LLorona embodies these really deep collective fears. The dread of losing loved ones, the crushing guilt of, say, failed parenthood, and the fear of punishment for moral transgressions.
So she taps into very real human anxieties.
Precisely. And modern psychological interpretations even reinterpret her to reflect silent struggles like postpartum depression or intergenerational trauma. The legend becomes a vehicle for discussing mental health within communities, which is quite powerful.
So she embodies these very human fears and even modern struggles. But how does this story function in a community, like beyond that personal psychological level?
Right, that's where the sociological aspect really comes in. The tale acts as a powerful cautionary social tool. Historically, parents used her image to enforce behavior, much like other cultures' bogeymen.
Okay, the behave or LLorona gets you idea again.
Exactly. It reinforces parental discipline and encourages sticking to cultural norms. But this leads us to a really interesting point about cultural reclaiming. While traditionally she might reinforce certain gender norms or punish adultery,
Yeah.
La Llorona has been reinterpreted and reclaimed in some communities, particularly through Chicana feminist scholarship, which looks at narratives from a Chicana woman's perspective. Here she becomes a symbol of resilience, even a victim of patriarchal betrayal.
That's a powerful shift in interpretation, from just a terrifying figure to a symbol of resilience. And you mentioned a surprising finding from the sources earlier. Tell us more about that.
Yes, indeed. Maybe one of the most, astonishing insights comes from parapsychologist Christopher Chicon's extensive research. He analyzed thousands of alleged encounters,
Thousands. Okay.
and he found that among the consistent sightings, there were, and I'm quoting here, no indications of any malevolence, animosity, or malice toward the children at the center of each encounter, but rather only benevolence, warmth, compassion, and even protective, nurturing characteristics.
Whoa. Benevolence, not vengeance.
Exactly. It completely challenges that long-held terrifying image. It suggests the traditional narrative might have been distorted, perhaps by patriarchal views or machismo over time.
That really turns the story on its head.
It does. And beyond that, La Llorona has also taken on a very modern role as a protest symbol in Mexico, particularly against enforced disappearances.
How so?
Her image as a grieving mother searching endlessly for lost children resonates powerfully with that collective trauma and resistance. She's become an emblem for social justice movements.
That's truly astonishing. It really speaks to how these stories can be shaped not just by history, but by how we choose to interpret them today. With all that incredible detail, it's clear La Llorona is a powerful figure. But is she unique, or are there similar weeping women out there across the world?
Good question. And no, this phenomenon isn't isolated at all. La Llorona is definitely part of a widespread weeping woman archetype found across the globe. Well, you might recognize notable analogs like the White Lady from Europe, that ghostly woman in white, often mourning a lost child or husband near water.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of her.
Or the Banshee, the Irish wailing female spirit foretelling death.
Hmm.
If you look at the bigger picture, this larger mosaic, you see recurring themes of maternal tragedy and vengeance across many different mythologies.
So it's a common theme.
Very common. There are strong parallels to Greek myths like Lamia, the child-devouring demon who lost her own children, or Medea, who murdered her sons for revenge.
Right, Medea, dark stuff.
And going back to Aztec mythology, you find Xochitl weeping for sacrificed children, considered predecessors to La Llorona.
Ah, connecting back again.
Other connections include Lilith and maybe Eve in Jewish folklore, also associated with child loss. La Segua in Central America, a shape-shifting phantom luring men to doom. And in Southeast Asia, the Pontianak, a vampiric ghost in white.
So many variations. What are the common threads?
Well, commonalities include the mourning mother figure, often involved in infanticide or driven by regret, a strong association with water, serving as cautionary tales, almost always female spirits, and frequently driven by betrayal or revenge.
Okay, that makes sense.
But what's truly fascinating here, and what sets La Llorona apart, is that unlike many purely malevolent counterparts, these modern interpretations are re-evaluating her. Seeing her as a symbol of resistance, even benevolence, especially within Chicana feminist scholarship.
The reclaiming aspect again?
Exactly. That, alongside her unique conflation with La Malinche and her adoption as a protest symbol in Mexico, truly sets her apart. It shows just how dynamic and culturally resonant this legend remains.
Wow, what a deep dive into the fascinating world of La Llorona. We've explored her haunting cries, traced her ancient roots, dissected her, well, terrifying yet evolving persona, and even found these surprising nuances, like her role in public safety or as a symbol of resistance.
Yeah.
You really now have a richer understanding of not just a ghost story, but a complex cultural phenomenon.
And that leads us to ask, how do these ancient stories, passed down through generations, continue to serve the evolving needs of communities today?
Good question.
Whether it's for public safety, a powerful cautionary tale, or a symbol of fierce resistance and social justice, LLorona continues to adapt and reflect our deepest anxieties and maybe our strongest hopes.
A living legend in a way.
Definitely. So, maybe a final thought for you to consider. As folklore keeps adapting and reflecting our world, what new forms might LLorona take in the future? And what new messages might her eternal wail carry?
Keep that question in your mind as you go about your day. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.